on Chapter 11 is joint cost. The chapter also will talk about byproducts and scrap. I'm not going to get into the calculations, really, especially the scrap side. Not going to get into the calculations for very minor byproduct side. We're primarily going to focus on some fairly relevant products, joint products, and how we allocate them. What happens? We have a joint process. One you're probably most familiar with, drilling oil out of the ground. Get the little rig, you drill the oil comes up. That oil eventually becomes many different things. But initially, it all had a joint process being drilled out of the ground. That drilling has a cost. The problem is, we're going to have all these, final products. How do we get that joint cost allocated to all those products? They share it up to a point, and then they're split off into the various different products, where they can have their own new cost to process and so forth. It's unrelated to each other. Initially, they're just related costs. So we're focusing again on just an allocation. In the space of the last two topics are special types of allocation. Joint costs and service department costs, this whole cost allocation type of thing. So this terminology. Joint process is simply the manufacturing process that produces more than one product line. So joint process happens at the same time, resulting in multiple products. Things that can also happen, you can have scrap and byproducts as well coming out of this. Joint costs, simply these costs are related to this joint process. Separate costs are any additional costs you have after those products are split off. Those are going to be directly traceable to that product. So we're not going to have to worry about allocating them. They're going to be directly matched up to the product. And just so you know, byproducts, they're typically sellable. But they're usually low value. Scrap, on the other hand, you might be able to sell it. Value them negligible. You might be able to, get someone to buy, especially recyclable type stuff. Maybe you can have someone buy your, scrap in that sense, but it's going to be like, pennies almost. That sort of thing. Whereas waste is simply going to be, you just have to dispose of it. No sales value. Alright, so we can have our primary products, our joint products. We can have byproducts that, depending on what the level is we can sell them, we might lump them in with our joint products if they have a high enough revenue. Scrap usually is just going to be something that there's a little bit of value as, maybe some recyclable type stuff that someone's willing to pay us, but it's not much value whatsoever. Waste, there's no value whatsoever. We can't sell it. We can best is just to get rid of it. So all this stuff comes out of that initial process. We're primarily going to focus on things that we can sell and get some value out of. The other thing, split off point. That's simply where they become their distinguishable multiple products, where they're no longer going to be worked on together. cost of these various products. Yes, overall for the company, we're going to have this cost no matter what. It's going to be rolled in as a total cost. Well, we allocate for, one, inventory purposes, along with the overhead. Overhead related to the whole company, but we still allocate to our products for inventory purposes. Cost of goods sold purposes, pricing purposes, because we want to be able to sell the products in total so they cover all these costs. So we got to allocate them out to try to figure out a pricing purpose and that sort of thing. So that's why we got to allocate them out. So there's multiple ways to do this. How we decide these costs go to these three various products. First one, we're going to talk about physical quantities. It's going to have to be something you can measure. If all your products come out with equal type units, well, I guess it could be units. Usually it's going to be some sort of weight type measurement, pounds, using the metric system, the equivalents there, gallons, and that sort of thing. Some sort of measurement of what's in those products rather than just units, because especially with oil, they're not necessarily going to be a unit. It's going to be the same for all products. So you measure it in some sort of determinable volume, gallons or so forth. Usually use physical methods because, well, output prices are volatile. Meaning that you don't really have control. They're going to change. Very often, gas is quite volatile. It goes up and down, up and down. Product prices might not necessarily be set by the market. Call it end market. You can kind of see that in gas. The main people that set the price is what OPEC decides the price of a barrel is. And the actual supply demand, that side is about commodities trading. It's not really related completely to the consumer buying the gas. There's some relationship. We saw that a little bit with the price of gas, but it's more that other market that's setting the price, not so much the end market of the actual consumers. So we have that problem. So we have these problems. We can't figure out the price of the products. The only way we can really allocate these joint costs is based on their physical volume. All right. So I got a little sample homework. I have one from Mikey's. We're going to go back to that beer we were making back in process cost. I changed the name of it. So it's called a micro beer. It's a small brewery. They started off processing single brewery. They have these initial costs, these joint costs. That goes into making beer of $450,000. So that's the initial brewing stage. What they can get out of this initial stage is they can get a light beer, they can get a dark beer, and they can get this sellable impure byproduct that has a relevant sell price, so we're going to count it as a joint product. For $450,000, it gives them 15,000 gallons of light beer. Gives them 20,000 gallons of dark and 25,000 gallons of this impure byproduct. Basically, what happens is impure byproduct, it's, that leftover, primarily the grains that has some liquid left in it. We need to, I guess, let dry out. But at least I know I went to a brewery tour in Portland. What they do with their grains, well, they have these cows that then get to start feeding off of them. The yeast hasn't been added, so it's not alcoholic. So you don't have drunk cows wandering around. But there was supposedly a pretty big market of selling these grains after they were through with the beer process. So during brewing, we have this joint cost. Then there's a split off point. Where we then have it so we can do whatever to make it light. We do whatever to get it to taste for dark, and we give it to the cows. And we just spit it out and let the liquids dry out and give it to the cows. But we got this 450,000 that we need to allocate to these three products. The physical quantity method simply says we're going to allocate it based on what we get out of the process. So in this case, little chart here, the product, light, dark, I definitely don't have room, impure, the gallons, 10,000, 20, 25. Means we get a total out of this 60,000 gallons. We simply take the proportion. So light beer, we get 15,000 gallons. We're total getting 60,000 out of this cost. So light beer makes up 25% of our total production. 15,000 divided by 60. Dark beer, we get 20,000 gallons. Divided by 60. 33.3% of our output is related to dark. So 5,000 gallons of the impure use 41.7%. So step one, simply take what we get out of this process in some sort of physical quantity we can measure. In case gallons, we can usually measure. A gallon is going to be the same. A gallon's a gallon. Figure out our total production and break out the proportion of the three products. Then we simply take, physical quantity says, if light beer makes up 25% of our production, they should get 25% of the cost. Total cost $450. Light beer then should be allocated $112,500. And next to how you round or keep the numbers in your calculator, it'll take a little. But 33.3% times 450, leaving that in your calculator, 850. And then we calculate Then the impure byproducts, since they're 41.7% of total output, they get that $187,500 in cost. Well, that's following the physical quantities measurement. We had the biggest proportion of gallons coming through the impure byproduct, so we're going to allocate the largest cost. Well, start thinking about that, and you're like, well, it really comes down to it. Those cattle farmers aren't going to pay us as much as that beer drinker is going to. Yes, the process costs for a lot coming here, but is it really fair that we're allocating the highest amount of cost? Is it really going to be able to absorb that cost? Are we going to be making mistakes later on when we try to price our light and dark beer? Not getting enough to cover all our costs? Because there's only going to be so much the cow farmers are going to be willing to pay for this stuff, because eventually they can go and get other types of feed. So that's the drawback to the physical quantities method. If we have a product that we can't sell for, very much, but we produce a lot of it, it's going to get kind of a high proportion of the cost allocated to it. So we have monetary values to help with this. Physical quantities, when we have no idea of what the final sales price is going to be or any kind of value of our product, it's our only choice to allocate the cost. And there can be limitations. We might should we really be allocating the most cost to the impure byproduct? All right, so let's look at these monetary methods. Benefit of monetary is going to recognize the relative ability for each product to generate a profit. Of course, the problem is, well, sales values might change. Basically 3 ways. We're primarily going to focus on 2 because one, that's kind of a mix of the other 2. 2 ways of doing this. Sales value at split off, and then what we call approximated net realizable value. The third way is just net realizable value split off. So that's not the approximated. Meaning you can actually get the realizable value instead of trying to approximate it. What's happening here? The sales value at split off is basically what can you sell it for at this point. Well, it turns out we go and figure out that if we sell these off at the split off point, let's pretend we can sell it off at the split off point for this example, we can make $200,000 on the light. We can make $400,000 on the dark, and we can make $200,000 on the impure byproduct. Sales value at split-off point is going to allocate these costs based on the value at the point of split-off. Pretty straightforward. The name of the method is telling you what you're doing. You're splitting off, separating the joint cost based on the value at the split-off point. So in this case, sales value, light 200, dark 400, and impure 200. Proportion. So total value at the split off point is 800,000. So adding those three together. Portion. $200,000 divided by 800,000. percent. As well. Dark 400,000 divided by 800,000. That's going to be 50%. So, times 450,000, 112,500. So if we can sell at the split-off point, the value at the split-off point, the sales dollars we'd get in, place those products, would mean we would allocate $112,500 each to light and impure, and $225,000 to dark. It brings in the most sales value. We can sell it for the most. A little bit more in line with the impure. Yes, we're selling 25,000 gallons, so we can only make 200,000 off of it. So we're only going to allocate the cost it can cover. So starting to get a little bit more fair here. Problem with this. Yeah, light and dark are not going to be sellable at the split-off point. Really probably at this point, I'm assuming, because the yeast helps do different things and yes, age it differently, that it may not even be beer at the split-off point. Probably not going to want to drink it. You probably really don't have anybody that's going to give you $200,000 for this light beer. Yes, probably this is where it's going to be for the impure byproduct. These two, they're going to have further processing. And that costs beyond this point to get them to the acceptable thing you're going to sell. Well, what we got to figure out then for next, the net realizable value of split off is going to take into consideration, or approximate net realizable value in the case that we're going to look at, these additional costs of producing these. in the sales value after further processing. To get light beer to actually be light beer, it takes an additional $120,000 in cost. When we add those costs, we can sell it for $400,000. The dark takes an additional $80,000 to make it dark beer, but then we can sell it for $600,000. So there's nothing really to do here. Maybe we sit out in the sun, but that doesn't cost us anything, and it's still $200,000. Realizable value is simply meaning, if we back it into here, what might we get at this point? Approximating that realizable value means is we're going to approximate what the value is at this point. I mean, we don't really have a market that someone's willing to pay $200,000 for it. We don't really have a market someone's willing to pay $400,000. So we got to backtrack into figuring out what the value is at this point. We have to approximate it. We don't really truly have a market to go out and see what the actual value is. We know what we can sell it for at the end of processing. So we have to figure out what's the value of it before further processing. So to do that, we take no, that's $450,000. We'll take our product, right here, take its final sales value, the $400,000, take the processing cost, additional processing cost of $120, and we get our estimated we take the 400 minus, so we can eventually get this, but it's going to take this to get there. So that means beforehand it must have been worth 280. The idea is if we put this into it to get here, the value before must have been what we get to less the cost. And that's its approximated net realizable value. Being that there is no market for it at this point, but we know that our additional costs are $120,000, and we know that we'll be able to sell it for $400,000. Then it must have been worth this at the point it split off. Same thing for dark. We'll eventually make $600 on it. We had to put $80,000 into it to get it there. So before we put the $80,000 into it, it must have been worth $520. In pure simple, it's 200 before, putting 0 into it, it's going to be 200 at the split off point. So if we have a ready available market at the split off point, we can just go ahead and use sales value at the split off point. We know its value. But like here, we know one's really going to buy it before before it's actually processed to the true stage of beer that you drink. All best we can do is backtrack into its value at the split-off point. Then we can allocate cost based on that value. Total approximating net realizable value, adding up to 3, it's $1 million. 280 divided by 1 million, 28%. These calculations are fairly easy since it's a million. You just knock off the zeros. That'll be 52%. That'll be 20%. Now multiply by the 450. We'll allocate $126,000 to the light beer, $234,000 to the dark, and $90,000 to the impure byproduct. So we've got 3 methods we can easily use to allocate joint costs. All we're going to allocate is the joint cost. We don't allocate any additional processing after the split-off point. Those are directly traceable to the product. Physical quantities method, don't know what the sales value is going to be at all. If the sales price goes up and down daily, we can't, figure this amount out even. So the best we can do is use something we can measure like gallons or pounds, something along those lines, and allocate based on physically what our output is, and allocate the cost based on that. Other option, well, if we can readily sell the products at their split-off point, well, what's their value at the split-off point? Allocate costs based on what we can actually sell them for at the split-off point. Thirdly, if we don't have a value at the split-off point for any of our products, use the case that 2 of them did and 1 didn't, still wouldn't be able to, use just the sales value method. We have to approximate that value at that point. And the only way we have to knowing the approximated value here is figuring out what the final sales value will be, less what it takes to get there. And then allocate based on that. The actual allocation part, not really, too difficult compared to some of our other overhead allocation methods. So you just have to figure out the proportion of which method you're using. What are the other issues? Other issues we got to consider with process costing. I told you back in chapter 10 that there was a decision-making idea here. Well, that goes along with, let's say that we actually could, for some strange, freaky reason, sell the light beer at the split-off point for $200,000. Our decision would be sell at split-off point or process farther. The key thing with this decision, all of this, we will ignore joint costs in total and allocated. what differs. It's additional cost and what additional you can get out of it. So here, I can make $200,000. If by adding $120,000 I get $400,000, my profit will be $280,000. When deciding between selling it at split-off point versus processing it further, the whole thing is based on, do I make enough to cover those additional costs? Yes, if it actually came out to be about $200,000, yes, it's whatever you feel like doing, I guess. But as long as you make more, you cover your costs, plus if you come in more than $200,000, you go ahead and process it further. If, for instance, let's say the additional cost for $220,000, then by processing it further, we'd only make $180,000. Well, I don't want to add all the extra costs and time if I can sell it now. So that's the difference between that decision. It's just those costs of further processing and the revenue. It has nothing to do. You do not allocate don't allocate the joint cost for this decision. Completely ignore it because it's going to be the same if you sell it now or you process further. Those costs have to be covered one way or the other. It's just the additional cost to go into that decision. Okay? Question. The whole premise of this whole thing is we got this joint process that costs us something. And we have to allocate that cost to what we get out of that process. Eventually, we'll have the split-off point. When we have the multiple products, up to this point, we have some sort of process that they shared. You see this in oil, you see this in timber. You see it in just a variety of things. If you just, especially if you're doing case 6, talking about this, I think you got a peach orchard. They grow the peaches. Joint cost, the taking care of the trees, and you get that peach. What can you make out of those peaches? Those are going to be your joint products. And part of the question is coming up with 5 other companies. The internet search might not go well, but if you just sit down in your house and look at the products in your house, how did that come to be? Well, okay, that is related to this. And at some point, they were together. So, timber's a good one to think about there. Things you can make out of potatoes. Just spend a couple minutes thinking, you'll come up with stuff. Make sure I cover. And one other thing that might come in handy for the exam, all of this is based on the value of what you produce, not on what you actually sell. So if in this case, we had 15,000 gallons of light, produced. So let's say we sell only 10,000 gallons. All 3 calculations are based on what we produce. Sales value of what we produce. Net realizable value of what we produce. Not of what we actually sell. So keep that in mind. But the idea is we'll eventually sell the rest of those 5,000 that we made. We can just ignore what was actually sold. Focus on what was produced. Okay. Any other questions? If that wasn't a question, I can't. in Chapter 11. I think there's other stuff, like I said, especially scrap, and there's the whole offsetting of what you get from the scrap, and, offsetting the cost of the other stuff and so forth. Not really going to get into that. Get this part down, and I'll be pretty happy. Understanding approximated net realizable value. Next time we'll work with problem on this in your group. So